This programming is sponsored by Confident Buying, offering a May 20th webinar on a question many ask: should you continue renting or is it time to move? Support today's webinar with interest rates and inflation. Buying.com/webinar. Support for Houston Public Media comes from listeners like you and from Houston Mountain. Let's Play Houston, a collaborative initiative to bring headlines to provide neighborhood parks across Houston's landscape. Learn more at HoustonParksville.org.
So, right, you're at Radio Lab.
We go places, right? In an elevator. Walking through shin-length grass.
On Mars,
My closet like a gypsy.
Kolkata, inside the cloud, and everywhere. Radio Lab, Saturdays at 9 p.m. on News 88.7.
I'm Greg Dalton.
And I'm Ariana Brocious. On Climate One, we believe that addressing the climate crisis begins by talking about it.
So we engage diverse voices to deepen your understanding of all aspects of the climate emergency, the individual and the systemic.
The scary and the exciting, causes and solutions.
So join us for conversations about the most critical issue of our time on Climate One.
Sundays at 6 a.m. on News 88.7.
Your NPR station, News 88.7 KUHF Houston, a service of the University of Houston. Get local and breaking news anytime at HoustonPublicMedia.org. Listen to us on your favorite devices. Tell your smart speaker to play News 88.7.
Early voting is underway today ahead of next week's primary runoff election. Follows the election this past Saturday in Houston City Council District C. I'm Craig Cohen. Today on Houston Matters, results from Saturday's election, and we walk through key runoffs on Houston area ballots for next week's election.
Houston Matters with Craig Cohen is a production of Houston Public Media with support from Baylor College of Medicine.
Also this hour, the state of Houston area sidewalk standards. We talk about the problems with the sidewalk initiative. Plus, we welcome your dog and cat care questions for veterinarian Dr. Robert Tyler. Send those now to talk@HoustonMatters.org. And the Astros will have to carry on without Jose Altuve for a while. We discuss that and the Texans' 2026 regular season schedule. We'll start with the news update from NPR News 88.7. Stay with us.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lynn Casey. President Trump's controversial nominee to be the country's next public lands chief has been confirmed by the U.S. Senate on a party line vote. NPR's Kirk Siegler reports that as director of the Bureau of Land Management, Stephen Pierce will oversee public lands he's previously called for selling.
Steve Pierce is a fierce Trump loyalist who spread conspiracy theories around the 2020 election, serving as chair of the state GOP in Mexico. Also once owned an oil field services company that states Permian Basin. The BOM is the lead agency that approves oil and gas drilling on federal land. Congressman Pierce joined the calls of other conservative Western lawmakers to sell federal or transfer it to state control, a fringe idea in the West that's gained traction. But during his confirmation hearing earlier this year, Pierce said those statements were in his past. Kirk Siegler, NPR News.
The World Health Organization has declared a new outbreak of Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda to be an international public health emergency. As NPR's Ping Huang reports, U.S. health officials are working to move exposed Americans out.
Dr. Satish Pillai is managing the Ebola response for the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Pillai says that being moved to Germany, along with 6 other Americans that are considered high-risk contacts for treatment and observation. Germany, because their doctors have experience with Ebola patients and it's quicker to fly there. Ebola disease is rare and deadly. Health
looking for just 30 to leave. If not enough people accept the offer, the network says it'll carry out targeted layoffs among news gathering staff. NPR executives say staffers on shows and podcasts, including hosts, are not affected. Editor-in-Chief Thomas Evans is also consolidating news gathering desks to ensure that reporters on related topics work more closely together. David Folkenflik, NPR News.
Unions representing workers, island railroad, and transit officials have agreed to a contract ending the 3-day strike. New York Governor Kathy Hochul announced the deal on social media and said that phased service will resume Tuesday at noon. It's tomorrow morning. It may still be messy for the commuters. It's NPR News. One of the largest electricity producers in the U.S. could soon grow even bigger. NextEra Energy plans to acquire Dominion Energy. NPR's Stephen Basaha reports that's raising some concerns about already rising electrical prices.
The merged company would cover Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. Darrell West is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Says a big utility often comes with more lobbying power and strong political ties.
Anytime there's a merger,
But he says state regulators still have power to oversee these companies.
and to make sure they're not gouging the consumers and that the large users pay their fair share.
Specifically, the power-hungry data centers will be by state and federal regulators. NextEra says that would take 12 to 18 months. Stephen Basaha, NPR News.
145,000 American children have likely had a parent detained in the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. That's according to a new report released today by the Brookings Institution. More than one-third of those children were under 6 years old. The report estimates that more than 22,000 American kids have likely experienced the detention of both parents. Washington, D.C. and Texas have had the highest ratios of affected children. The Brookings report is based on a statistical analysis of the detainee population. It estimates there are more than twice as many U.S. children with detained parents than indicated by numbers supplied by the Department of Homeland Security. This is NPR News, live in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Imaginable Futures, envisioning a future where learning sparks opportunity and thriving belongs to everyone. Learn more at imaginablefutures.com and the listeners who support this NPR station.
Did you know your gift to Houston Public Media could go twice or even 3 times as far through your employer's matching gift program? Many companies will match the charitable donations of their employees, and some even match gifts from retirees. That means your support for trusted news and programs could have double the impact for our community. Find out if your company participates at HoustonPublicMedia.org/match.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Good morning. Thanks for joining us here on News 88.7, Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. Coming up this hour, what the conditions and policies surrounding sidewalks in Houston have to say. What will we value? Also, the dog questions for send those now to talk@HoustonMatters.org. And we will talk about some good news and bad news for the Astros and the Texans 2026 regular season schedule, which was released last week. First, though, as you just heard, yes, here comes yet another election. Early voting is underway today in the Texas primary runoff. Election begins 8 days from now, on Tuesday, May 26th. That follows another election that was just held Saturday for voters in Houston City Council District C. Let's talk about it all now with Mark Jones, a science fellow at Rice University's Mark, good morning. Good morning, Craig. Let's start with Saturday's news. Joe Panzarella won the Houston City Council District C runoff by a wide margin, 64 to 35% over Nick Hillier. Why do you think Panzarella wins here?
One, we had another low turnout election. A few more people voted than back in April, but it was like less than 10,000, still less than 6%. Panzarella was able to appeal to a more activist base. They're actually still turning out election after election, and was able to present himself as the more progressive candidate, the more fighter candidate, the person who would be out there advocating for progressive issues on a wide range of topics. And that's what this small electorate, 1,000, wanted to hear.
Panzarella Panzarello's victory comes despite a late attack ad and court challenge targeting Panzarello because he accepted an endorsement from the Council on American Islamic Relations, a Muslim civil rights organization, which the Abbott administration, without evidence, has characterized as a terrorist organization. The court rejected a petition late Friday to extend voting hours to Sunday, ostensibly so Orthodox Jews could vote another day, even though they'd had many days of early voting to do so. Did any of that affect this race?
Not really. I think the hope that was probably a real area was that by filing that lawsuit and putting a spotlight on the issue of the endorsement of Montero, that would motivate some Jewish voters to turn out and vote for Miller on Saturday. But clearly, if it did, it wasn't good enough.
Or perhaps
Quite possibly.
And for people who aren't following this race closely, what else should they know? You mentioned he's progressive. What else?
Well, I think in terms of, I think he's going to fit in very much in terms of that progressive wing of the council, in terms of pushing issues. It's probably going to be more of an opponent of the mayor than an ally of the mayor. Although I think we need to wait and see until he's actually on council and actually has the ability to introduce legislation as well as vote on things and speak on in chamber to see really where it's going to go vis-a-vis the mayor.
Yeah, he was co-founder of No Higher, No Wider, I-10, president of Freeman's Town, Fort Worth, a neighborhood. He's a politician. Very different, though, once you're an elected official on city council from being there protesting something. Sometimes you can actually be one voting.
Right, so he has a lot of experience being an activist. Now he's going to actually have to deal with his hands dirty on solving projects and problems, which sometimes isn't as easy as protesting as coming to compromises and making compromises, which is more about this race. In March, only a little over 30,000 people voted that primary. This spring is rather closer to 20 or 25,000, meaning that it's going to be a race where whoever turns out to vote will be be careful. Congress will hold at Mueller with the lead, not insurmountable.
Will you see the results of that runoff as in any way affect the direction of Republican politics?
Not really there either, because Mueller has been endorsed by President Trump. Christopher King has been endorsed by Governor Abbott. They both have their supporters in the Republican community, so I don't see that really representing much of a split. It's more an issue of personalities and who voters in Congressional District 9 want to see as the GOP nominee.
There are also primary runoffs in the race for Harris County Judge. What can you tell us about these candidates?
Well, there you have on the Democratic side, Denise Parker, former mayor of Houston, controller, city council member, running a strong campaign. She's being challenged by Letitia Plummer, who's a former city council member. Parker is, I think, a strong favorite there. A lot of Democrats know her, a lot of Democrats like her. They like what she did as mayor, and then what she's been doing since that time with the Victory Fund, which supports LGBTQ candidates throughout the country. We also, on the Republican side, though, have a competitive primary between Orlando Sanchez, who's been a long-time fixture in the Republican Harris County, and then Warren Howell, who's been incumbent actually to but he's challenging Sanchez. I think Sanchez has to be seen as the favorite there. But once again, both of these races are going to be determined by turnout. The lower turnout gets, it's going to go up. And if one candidate can get there with the turnout, much higher than the other, then everyone has a chance of making it.
Jones is making signs for the race reversing his big policy. Up next, we want to know what Houston does and doesn't value offering. All it says, just take a good hard look at our sidewalks. Find out what it means as Houston Matters continues on News 88.7 News.
This is Jennifer Henson of The Mall. Moth shows feature eyewitness accounts of the most important or hilarious or moving stories in a person's life. We don't go out on the super script or stage, so the stories have the excitement of a sporting event, but the intimacy of a tete-a-tete. Moth is simple and satisfying, like a home-cooked meal for the ears. That's the Moth background, radio exchange, PRX.com.
The Moth Radio Hour, Saturdays at noon on News 88.7.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Greg. Depending on where you live in Houston, you may or may not have a sidewalk outside your home. If you do, it may or may not be in great shape. It may or may not be your responsibility to maintain it. Houstonians talk a good game, but let's face it, for all the efforts towards more walkability around the region and their heavy planning, we're still awfully car-centric, and our sidewalks and policies surrounding them reflect that. In his new book, Sidewalk Nation, The Life and Law of America's Most Overlooked Resource, author Michael Pollack argues sidewalks are the contested terrain where America works out its most urgent questions about free speech, homelessness, disability rights, where cities are actually built for. Michael Pollack, welcome to Houston Matters. Good morning.
Thank you, Craig.
You are a lawyer, and you also see a legal argument here hiding in plain sight, the quality, condition, and policies surrounding sidewalks. What's that argument?
It's actually a bunch of them. So, first of all, one of the things that I think Houston is so interesting when it comes to land use planning, right, is, as listeners know, Houston famously does not have rigid zoning rules, and so that enables the city to have much more diverse mixed-use kinds of development in ways that cities elsewhere in the country often are prohibited from doing by their zoning laws. And so there's right there a way in which for sure how much demand there is for walkability is to look at property values. Property values near the system of trails, the Nicholson Trail, the NKT Trail, the Columbia Tap Trail. Property values are higher in those locations because of the access to walkability that they offer. So there is a lot of demand, and I saw it during my visits and my observations and in my interviews as well. There's a lot of demand and interest for more walkability. Houston lacks the broader vision to execute that, and I think that does need to come from the government.
Is that maybe, though, a chicken and egg problem? Are the property values higher because there's more walkability, or is there more walkability because the property values were higher, which meant more revenue to support projects that need walkability?
Well, and that's, again, part of the problem of the system of private responsibility and private finance is that we can't always tell, right? Moreover, it ends up being that the wealthier communities have more access to walkability than poorer communities do. And this is especially problematic when it is, or at least tends to be, poorer communities that are more reliant on sidewalks to get from home to work, from home to school, to errands, to friends' homes, to recreation and culture. The more one is reliant on sidewalks, the more important it is that they be in good condition, that they be a complete network. But wherever we see systems of private responsibility and private finance, we see this gap in quality between wealthier and poorer communities, and that only adds insult to injury when it's those very communities that are more reliant on that resource.
Where are some cities that are getting this right?
So, the city of Denver, just a couple of years ago, voters passed a referendum to shift responsibility for sidewalk construction and maintenance from property owners to the city, and they fund this with a fairly nominal fee on property owners. That money, rather than going into general revenue, is devoted to specifically sidewalk construction and maintenance. Now, this is just in its beginning stages, but other cities, mostly smaller cities that have taken this step, have seen real opportunities to more equitably and efficiently expand the network. And I think Denver is a great example of a big city making the right steps in that direction. I want to underscore, too, what I just said about not just equitable, but efficient, right? Even if we put to the side, and I don't think we ought to, but even if we put to the side the concerns about socioeconomic equity, it's just more economically efficient for the economies of scale that would come from one entity doing the development and the construction, rather than separated out across a bunch of individuals who may or may not have the resources or the attention to get it done effectively or in a timely fashion. So, both in terms of equity and just in terms of getting it done, these systems of government responsibility can be much more effective.
You argue that this is all about more than just walkability. Constitutional rights, legal rights are restricted when you don't have well-built and maintained sidewalks. How so?
That's absolutely right. So, sidewalks are not only places for us to get from point A to point B, to get from home to work or home to school. Sidewalks are also places where communities take shape, where local economies can thrive, where we exercise our rights to speak or protest or make public art. They're spaces where we end up having confrontations sometimes with police or other government surveillance. And so, yes, they implicate our rights under the First Amendment, under the Fourth Amendment. They implicate our rights under the Second Amendment when it comes to carrying firearms in public spaces. And so, sidewalks are not just about access and mobility. Sidewalks are really the space in our communities that is most heavily used, or at least could be most heavily used by such a wide range of people and uses, right? Whereas streets are for cars and transportation only, and parks are for recreation only. Sidewalks are where we see this collision of private use, economic use, government use, transportation use, and that's why they need much more attention, and that's why cities can really thrive if they devote more resources to them. But it's not just about devoting those resources, it's also about thinking through, as a society, what kind of sidewalk life, what kind of civic life do we want to have, and how can we construct and regulate sidewalks to achieve that kind of civic life.
Michael Pollock is the author of Sidewalk Nation,
feline companions for veterinarian Dr. Lori Teller from Meyerland Animal Clinic and the Texas Veterinary Medical Association. Dr. Teller, welcome.
Glad to be here.
And we welcome any questions you have about the dog or cat in your life. Call or text us at 713-440-8870. Email talk@houstonmatters.org. Post your question on our live video stream on Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. I do want to start with this. According to a nationwide survey out last month from the American Heartworm Society, Texas, for the first time, has the highest incidence of heartworm in dogs in the entire United States. First, remind us, what is heartworm?
Heartworms are a parasite that are carried by mosquitoes. So a mosquito bites your dog or your cat and passes on the immature form of the heartworms, which then migrate to your heart and lungs
and grow.
And grow. Looks like a big mass of spaghetti. Ugh. It's awful. And that leads to respiratory disease, heart failure, and ultimately death.
While this is a dubious statistical top spot for Texas,
for sure,
it's also not really a new phenomenon. I looked at the American Heartworm Society's incidence map, which come out every few years. Southeast Texas, in particular, has had the highest rates of heartworm in pets going back more than 20 years now.
Yeah.
You'd have to go back to 2004 to find a time when the rates were merely high. It's getting worse also every few years.
It is getting worse.
Why?
And the Gulf Coast has always been the hotbed of heartworm disease. But as the weather gets warmer, mosquitoes are more prevalent. And it's warmer in more northern areas, which is why now it's not just Southeast Texas, but all of Texas is encompassed in this. Harder and harder to battle the mosquitoes, it seems, and so the disease spreads. And of course, we had issues during Hurricane Katrina and subsequent hurricanes when animals who were from the Southeast and the Gulf Coast were then sent to northern areas where heartworms were less of a problem and allowed that to become a problem in those areas as well.
So this is as much about climate as anything else.
Climate's certainly involved in it. Parasites are spreading, ticks are spreading, Lyme disease is getting closer and closer to Texas with every passing year. And so we have to be able to manage the whole picture. And as a veterinarian, I'm focused on the parasites.
So the good news in all of this is that heartworm is relatively easy to prevent.
Heartworm is so easy to prevent. There are more options for heartworm prevention now than there ever have been. There are monthly topicals, there are monthly orals. There's actually an injection that can be given that will last either 6 months or 12 months, depending on which option you choose, so you don't have to remember it. Your animal won't take pills, doesn't cooperate for the topical, the injection is the way to go. My animals like the heartworm prevention, so they're very happy to get it on a monthly basis.
Snack.
They think it's a great treat.
You're not going to tell them otherwise.
No, I'm not. Yeah. And here you go. And so easy with so many different choices to give that it's worth doing.
Is the medication expensive?
It varies. So some of them are relatively inexpensive. Some of them that also include flea prevention and tick prevention and ear mite and mange prevention are going to cost more because they're covering more problems in that single dose.
How expensive, though, can it be to treat heartworm once your dog or cat ends up with it?
Yes, and it's certainly more expensive to treat. It can go into the thousands of dollars to treat, and you're also dealing with the potential for permanent lung and heart damage from the heartworm parasite living there, and residual damage can stay even after you've treated your pet.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. On the third Monday of each month, we welcome your dog and cat care questions for veterinarian Dr. Lori Teller. There is still time to call 713-440-8870. You can email us at talk@houstonmatters.org, or you can comment on our video stream at houstonpublicmedia.org and on Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. And that's where we have a question for you about flea and tick prevention. Do you recommend, are there pros and cons to chewables versus topicals for a dog? Is one better than the other?
One is not necessarily better than the other overall, though one may be better for your particular dog. So if you have a dog that is frequently getting bathed or groomed, loves to swim, spends time rolling in mud puddles, then definitely the oral version, or there is now also a long-lasting injectable version for flea and tick prevention, would be a better route to go. If your dog just refuses to take the oral version and is not a swimmer or getting bathed frequently, then a topical version is certainly the better option for you, because it will be what stays and works for the dog.
All right. We have an email from Kimberly who says, I've been finding large wet spots on furniture where my 8-year-old standard poodle has slept. I'm concerned she may have a urinary tract infection, but the wet spots are my only clue. She has not been on any kind of distress other than seasonal allergies. I've been giving her 2 Benadryl pills on days when it's especially bad. Are there any home remedies I can try for a urinary tract infection? Is it possible the Benadryl knocked her out so she peed in her sleep? I don't have room in my budget right now for vet bills. The last trip for dehydration was $700.
Oof, yes. Unfortunately, there is no home remedy for a urinary tract infection. I wish I could tell you differently, but there is not. It is possible that your dog is developing not a UTI, but some incontinence. And if the Benadryl does knock out your dog, it makes your dog super sleepy and misses the subconscious alerts to go outside, then that's certainly a possibility, and you could try cutting back on the Benadryl and see what happens as far as that goes. So certainly do that, but if it is a true urinary tract infection, it is going to take a veterinary visit to find out what's going on. They're going to need to look at a urine sample, see if there's bacteria there, and then determine the next best steps to get that under control. But if it's incontinence, certainly stop the Benadryl, see if it happens. If it's still continuing, then I would definitely recommend trying to see your veterinarian. Incontinence can also be managed with medication as well.
All right, let's take a call. We have Brent on the line from Conroe. Brent, what's your question for Dr. Teller?
Hi. We're about to get a new puppy soon, if I can get on the list, but I was wondering if it's worth it to purchase the insurance for any vet bills, and if so, if there's any place you recommend trying to go through.
Congratulations on the new puppy. Do you know what breed?
Well, we don't have it yet. We're trying to set it up so that we can get my kids want a chocolate lab.
Okay.
So we'll see.
Great.
We had a yellow.
Labs are the best. I have labs. Love them. So definitely first make sure you're going for screening for diseases that labs are going to. Same for animal discipline. Pet insurance can definitely be a great option for families to consider. And there is a variety of choices out there. Switching policies to see there's a website called this is personal. My cat gets canned food twice a day, and then there's a little bit of kibble left out for him to graze on, mostly because I don't need him awakening me at 4 a.m. to tell me how hungry he is.
I should point out, while you've already hit the ground running, as of June 1st, you formally become the new executive director and CEO of the Texas Veterinary Medical Association. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
What does the TVMA do?
The TVMA is a professional trade organization that advocates veterinarians and animals and livestock to improve both human and public health.
What will you be doing this trip?
I will be running the whole shebang. The buck will stop with me.
Okay.
But I'm fortunate
softens the blow. Maybe that monthly average.
Yeah, I mean, and they have options there. I mean, Braden Shoemake has played really well and can shift over to second base. Bryce Matthews, who's been playing center field really, really well, has actually came up as a second baseman, and so you'll see him get some time there as well. Listen, their lineup has been kind of a patchwork thing. Right? They haven't had a deep lineup all season. This doesn't have that defensive depth.
19 or 29. That sounds awful.
It is
Well, line place to play. Terrible year because they don't have 5 games on first place. So the record and basically the trajectory of the seasons
excitement around the fan base, I think the Texans really have a chance to push it.
Jeff, just how long is someone as a sports fan?
Look, we've been spoiled here with a decade plus of just greatness from the Astros. So I think if you're an Astros fan, part of what you need to be preparing yourself for is the inevitable downturn of the franchise. And I think he was good for another. How much Jim Crane likes to say that he never thought he was going to perform as a better. It's not really true. And quite frankly, if I'm Astros fans right now, baseball fans in general, I'm going to enjoy as much of the game because it's very good. Shutout starting the season based on so it's just an issue.
Welcome to the host of the Astros podcast.
band trip, and this was one of the activities. So yeah, I really like all of the crescendos and how it was all building up to like a really big moment at the end.
I think it actually speaks to what is most beautiful about humans, that we feel better when we help others. I think that's a beautiful, emotional, and pragmatic.
This is the kind of piece the Philharmonic should be doing. It was also interesting watching Gustavo Dudamel up close. He was really into it. I mean, he was really inside the piece.
The published reviews were also positive. Stacey Vanek Smith, writing for Bloomberg, said that David Lang had shown that economics, often reduced to stock tickers and earnings reports, can in fact be profoundly human. I caught up with David Lang about a week after the last of the 4 performances of Wealth of Nations, and I asked what it felt like to work on a big new piece like this for years, and then hear it come to life, and then go away.
There's always this post-experience depression, and the bigger the piece and the bigger the triumph, the deeper the hole.
But I mean, you have to feel it was a great success, no?
I always go into these things thinking that the definition of success would be to come out and not have everyone think that I'm incompetent.
Well, that's the way to set the bar low.
I want to set the bar low because there's so many things that can go wrong. And my music repeats a lot, so if you make a mistake, you'd be like, there's 10 minutes of this mistake.
And when you say a mistake, what would that actually be or sound like? And would we know?
I'm not sure you would know, but I would know. If I orchestrated it, if I asked someone to do something that I ended up not liking, and it's really easy to make those mistakes. They're, like 1,000 little tiny detail things, but they really can affect how the piece feels to me. Maybe not to anybody else because the piece didn't exist before. Nobody knows what it could have been. But I have a little checklist in my head of all the things that I might have done wrong.
What was on that checklist?
There's that movement that we talked about last time, the Woolen Coat, which I really wanted to make sure that it sounded as emotional and as full to everybody else as it did to me, singing it at home in my studio. And I was really happy that that worked out really well. The solo things, like I didn't know if having Fleur singing these arias with no accompaniment, if they would be so emotional.
Lang is talking about the mezzo-soprano Fleur Baron. She was one of the 2 vocal soloists in Wealth of Nations, along with the bass baritone Yvonne Tynes. Here is one of the arias that Lang was thinking of.
But in my heart, what I hoped would happen would be all those changes of scale would end up kind of focusing what happened to our attention as we listen. But you should tell me what you thought. I mean, I've been living with this piece for years. You just heard it the first time, so I'd be very curious to know what you thought.
I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was thought-provoking, but also totally engaging. It was deep, but accessible. There's a lot of different movements, obviously, and a lot of different emotions and a lot of different colors in the music, and you'll forgive me if I speak about music in a language that isn't quite the language of musicians or composers, but I found the music spiky and kind of punky at times, but also very delicate, celebratory, but also mournful. I found it confident, seeking.
What's weird, being a young composer, you're trying to learn things and figure things out, and you're always aware of what you're trying you've never done before. When you become a and I can say that as a senior citizen, you know things instinctively that you're not really paying attention to anymore. So these issues of pacing and depth, there are all sorts of really important things that I don't think about as intensely as I used to think about them. I just trust that I will know how they work. And so for me, one of the really fun things was thinking that I was going to have an experience that had a particular shape, like this giant, enthusiastic Adam Smith stuff with a full orchestra at the beginning, and that gradually as the piece went on, it would taper down to these more personal American thoughts. And we would get someplace that would be, as you said, optimistic, but also kind of really trying to pay attention to what's going on around us. And I wasn't really sure that that was going to work. But for me, that's the thing that I was really satisfied with. The shape of the intellectual argument, I was really happy with.
I had a lot of fun being at rehearsals, and there were many things that really impressed me. First of all, I'm just blown away by how good the New York Philharmonic is and their singers. When I heard the first choral rehearsal and then the first orchestra rehearsal, it sounded so good, I thought, oh, well, everybody must have rehearsed a bunch before already together. But in fact, they haven't. It does seem like an absolute miracle that a person like you could sit in your studio in Soho for a bunch of years and write dots on the paper. And then one afternoon in March of 2026, 48 vocalists and then a whole bunch of musicians and a couple soloists get together and they turn this two-dimensional thing into not even 3, like 6. Part of my thrill of watching you get enmeshed in this and watching you get happier and happier during the course of rehearsals, part of it was about the mystery and the magic of that, honestly. And so when I say it was inspiring and moving, the piece itself was, but I guess I also see the creation of a thing like this representing something really good about humankind, that we're able to do this.
I love that you say that, because I really think that that's what you heard during the rehearsal, was you heard what's good in people. Everyone has their individual part. One of the things you do as a composer is you're actually writing a series of instructions for 100 different people in this piece. And everybody has their own instruction. And they sit at home before the first rehearsal and they practice their own instruction. So they have an idea of what they're responsible for, but they have no idea if they're going to be able to make something good with someone else when they get together. And so the process of rehearsal isn't about them learning the notes. The process of rehearsal is them learning how to be a community that comes together to build this thing.
So you, the composer, were there in the room for all the rehearsals. I'm guessing that for all the performers, the chorus, the soloists, the musicians, the conductor, that they're accustomed to playing music by dead composers at least 90% of the time, right?
That's absolutely right.
And you're, unless something had gone really wrong during rehearsals, you were going to be alive at the end of it. And I was very curious to see how un-diva-like you were. Both the conductor of the vocal chorus and then the conductor of the orchestra, Gustavo Dudamel, they would often turn to you and ask a question or defer to, how do you like that? How's that sounding? Should we try this? What surprised me, I'll be honest, was how I'd say 99% of the time you'd give them a big thumbs up and say, beautiful, it's beautiful. And I wondered, did you really feel that way, or was it somewhat strategic? Do you feel like your work is done and now if you start nitpicking, you're just going to make yourself asking for detailed notes about every movement, and this sent me into a little bit of terror because I realized there's movement 1, what are your comments? Then movement 2, what are your comments? And I realized I better have comments for movement 3 and movement 6 and whatever. So as he's fixing the things that I just pointed out, like maybe angry school, I gotta say something for movement 5, right? I felt like then the pressure was on. It sounds as though you attended every performance, correct?
I went to every rehearsal and performance, yes.
What was the experience like for you
And every night it really felt like it got faster. Even though it didn't get faster, I got used to the trajectory of the piece. And by the end, I believe that we were at the end of the quality of the performance. Not the musical quality, but what the players, the singers, and the solos found is changed. And some of the nights were much more emotional. And I thought that was really interesting. It's like they got to the point very quickly where everyone could make great sound and could make the argument for the piece. But I think what happened those 4 nights of performances is that Gustavo is finding something different. He's bringing something out. He's looking at a different bunch of players in a particular moment to give them confidence and make them emerge.
As I was watching rehearsals, I got to thinking and recognizing really how phenomenally expensive it is to produce something like this. A lot of people, a lot of real estate, probably not enough rehearsal for your taste, but still a lot of performances where there's no ticket sales and so on. And, you know, music like this today, as it was a couple hundred years ago, is really only possible because of patronage, because of wealthy individuals and institutions. And this piece has some harsh words for wealthy individuals and institutions. Did you ever feel that the piece was a little bit biting the hand that feeds it and pieces like it?
First of all, I think it costs a lot of money in our society to do bad things, too.
What's on your list of bad things?
I think that list is very long. The idea that you might actually be able to take a bunch of money and do something for good, that doesn't sound like a bad thing. I really would hate to live in a world where all of the good and virtuous things have to be done very cheaply. I was sort of worried that maybe some of the board members would get mad at me, but actually several of the board members came up and thanked me. We're at a time right now where maybe there's such a division and a distance between the people who have billions and billions of dollars and actually control the world and the people who only have $400 million. I actually think the billionaires are trying to make the people who have $400 million feel really bad about themselves. So it could be that it is a time when there are actually things that we can say together for a large group of people about how money can be better spent.
This got me to wondering how the New York Philharmonic spends its money. The Philharmonic, like the Metropolitan Opera, the New York City Ballet, and all the other arts organizations at Lincoln Center, all the arts organizations everywhere, really, are struggling with rising costs, falling ticket revenues, and let's call it unpredictable philanthropy. The Metropolitan Opera, whose annual budget is around $330 million, had been working on a partnership with the Saudi Arabian government that would bring in $200 million, but the Saudis just pulled out. The Philharmonic, with a budget of around $90 million, is in better shape, in part because they have just landed Gustavo Dudamel, who is a superstar, as its music and artistic director. The Philharmonic also has a new president and CEO, Matthias Tarnopolsky, who has a long-standing friendship with Dudamel.
The New York Philharmonic is on the cusp of